Yeah. All right. Universal 2D will work just fine. I do, as I did with the UFO project, have one part of this pre-made. We're going to add some other stuff to it. Particularly, I want to deal with a couple configuration things for the project that we saw yesterday but didn't do, or at least we ran into the issue. And I also want to talk about some common coding tests, in particular, creating new objects into a scene while it's running rather than when you're building it, which is particularly important when you want to be able to do things like shoot. So we'll see how code can do that once this finishes booting up. Now we're getting there. Installing packages, 63 out of 65. All right, there we go. Now we're starting to move a little bit. Looking for moved APIs. Post processing. I say it's just it gets to halfway, it stops, so it does 8 zillion things, and then all of a sudden it starts going again and just finishes the whole thing.
Hold on. I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna look at the whole door. It's gonna eat me.
So close.
It's gonna eat it.
To say one of the other things I made use of when I originally built this project was that to help avoid the sprite overlap and Z fighting thing, it actually just presents things at different heights through the scene, which is also one of the reasons why it's handy that Unity has a separate 2D physics engine from the 3D physics engine, because if you were to use 3D physics on 2D objects, but they're at different levels, then they'll still miss basically because they're off in the Z dimension, then they're not colliding. Whereas in the 2D physics environment, it only cares about the X and the Y positions when it checks for collisions, even if the Z positions are different. So, okay, we have a blank project. It has finished loading. I'm going to go to my downloads. I'm going to pull in my package here, and you should ideally see these guys when it pops up. You know, bullet.cs, demo.unity, a couple of Marsh. We don't need the move player one, although it shouldn't hurt to leave it in there. Should have purged that. And these other guys, these two small bullets, should all come in. So we say import to actually bring all of this into our project. If you get it from here, or Duncan here has a copy. All right, so here's the thing. I have not organized this project as much as the other one. My elements are just sitting out here in the assets folder. That's not ideal, but for a small project, it's okay. There isn't enough stuff here for me to get lost or get mixed up. And I'm going to open this scene called Demo. It won't necessarily be open by default, and you should be able to see this sort of marshlands environment.
Which one did you put in?
Demo?
With, mushroom.
Now I'm still running into little overlap glitches. I think. Yeah, the tile assets that I'm using here are about 16-bit era in terms of their overall complexity. That's the era that I grew up where gaming was like and started to be considered like really sort of that we thought it was cool. And to a certain extent, it has recovered its popularity. I think that the 2D genre in general has had a number of reasons to come back, but a big part of it actually was the rise of mobile phones and other touchscreen devices because it was easy enough to replicate the controls, and because the devices when they first came out were not nearly as powerful as desktop computers, but they were powerful enough to do this stuff. And I think that helped drive a big resurgence in the popularity of vintage and retro style 2D games. Now let me just see here. Do I have to fix my sorting layers? Super Nintendo had some great games. Okay. So it did work. We did see it coming in correctly, just had the camera needed to sort out a couple of glitches. This is one limitation of the package import system that Unity just does not let us fix. Bye-bye. Which is that I exported these assets from a project where the gravity was turned off, but this is a new project, and when I bring the assets in, the physics settings, there's no way to include those in the package so that they get updated. So my new project, I have to do the same thing we did yesterday. I have to go into project settings under edit. I have to find the physics 2D tab. I have to find gravity, and I have to change the gravity Y to 0.
I don't know.
So there, now it's not falling out of scene, and if you have, is the player visible in the hierarchy? No.
Is it that you don't destroy on mode thing?
No. You have the what scene? Yeah, what scene's open? Sample, yeah, because if you added stuff to sample scene, that's not going to help. There should be a scene in the top level called demo. Open that up.
And we always think the hierarchy was enemy, not the player.
If you see that, I thought I cleaned that up, but if you see that issue, you can just with the red text, you can just select the enemy line and delete it. That's fine. That's just a glitch. You probably got the version of the file from right before I updated this. Oh, that's right, because you got it by SneakerNet. Right. Other thing that's going on here, now that the gravity is off that we can see, is that I have a move control. It is not the same thing as the move controls from the UFO project. There's no momentum. It just keeps moving as long as I'm holding down the button and stops as soon as I let it go. This is already set up with the controls bound, set to a particular speed. The script's very similar, not identical, but very similar to the one from UFO. I'll look at it briefly, but it's the same overall comparison. Highlight a couple of the elements that happen here. And it loves to open Visual Studio, but then not open the file that you opened. So here's Move Player. It has an input action variable specified. It has the speed variable. Both of those show up in the inspector, so I can configure them, like put bindings on the action. In this case, one of the things about actions like this that you add as custom variables to scripts, they're not enabled by default. They're there, but the input system won't process them. You have to tell it to enable them. So this is set that whenever this move component gets enabled, it turns its movement action on. And if it gets disabled, it turns it back off. And then the only other real component here is this fixed update. Fixed update happens every physics cycle through the game, not necessarily every frame. Those don't always line up. Part of the point of physics of fixed update, the reason it's called fixed, is that it happens at a specific, always the same amount of game time. And usually Unity is pretty good at keeping it well synchronized with the visible frame rate. You won't usually get skips and things. As a general rule, this is where the physics engine does its processing, its collisions, it's things like this. So anytime I'm manipulating something frame after frame and it affects the game mechanics, like it moves objects and colliders around, I do it in fixed update. And so I'm just saying, hey, is there a rigid body 2D that is part of the same object as this script? And if we found one and it's a good object, like it hasn't been like deleted and just not lost out of the system, then I would like to find its position and I would like to modify that point by a 2D point, which I read from my movement control, multiply by my speed, multiply by the amount of time that's happened this frame in order to keep it consistent with my frame rate and my physics emulation rate. This is one small glitch I will mention for those of you who have previous experience with Unity or with regards to Unity tutorials that you might see, which is that frequently when they want to move things around, they will illustrate using transform.position or transform.translate or move. That works great as long as what you're moving is not physics stuff. It will kind of work with physics stuff, but you will not always get clean behavior out of collisions. You will not always get collisions evaluated correctly, and it will have more of an impact on performance. If we set the position on the rigid body rather than on the transform, it will move it in a way where it is aware that it is moving a physics object, and it will move it and it will incorporate collisions into that and do the calculations necessary for them. That's the preferred way to do that. This script, that's all it does, is it just jogs this guy around. The biggest issue is one that we had at the end of the UFO project, but we did not attempt to address, partly because we were out of time. So I am going to play this, which is once it's running, that I can slide right off the side. And this has a couple of problems. One is I could lose it and not be able to figure out where my player is. The other is that these top-down shooters, for the most part, they are the predecessors to the bullet hell genre. The game that's considered really the first thing that would be called, like the first popular game that would be called a bullet hell was Ikaruga, which is a top-down 2D shooter. It's a puzzle bullet hell shooter, basically. It introduced this idea where your ship is either in red shield mode or white shield mode. And when you're in white mode, red bullets damage you and white bullets like build your shield back up. And then you have a button that flips you over to red mode where now it's the other way around. And so there will be waves of red and white. And so it's this combination of both trying to get into the right places, but also switching your shields back and forth between the right versions. It was a mind-blowing game when it came out. It was originally an arcade game. And bullet hells are not so handy if you can just walk off the side of the screen and just ignore everything. So we want to kind of address this factor. We will need to put a barrier around this because right now there's two factors missing here. My player object has a rigid body, but like the UFO when we started, it doesn't have a collider. So it has math, but no volume. And there's no current definition for my surroundings. Collisions only happen when there are at least two things. What is the sound of one object colliding? Doesn't make much sense, does it? So there will need to be two different colliders. One will define the player's volume and position. I did not fix this particular part. I'm going to reset the player's X and Y to 0, 0 so that they line up with this parent object. Otherwise, the collider is going to seem like it's in a really weird place. And I spent a lot of time talking about boxes yesterday. For instance, if I go here, so for instance, if I were to go and I were to add a box collider 2D, that's not a great choice, right? I don't think so. You know, even if I snug it down a little bit narrower and get it in there, it's going to have these big corners where bullets going across diagonally might clip the invisible corner of the ship, and that makes players very unhappy. Very little makes them angry, like dying when they thought they were okay. So I'm not going to use the box collider. I'm going to go to these three dots over here, and I'm going to say remove component. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to pick the Polygon Collider 2D. If you have trouble finding it in the list, try typing poly or 2D or something into the search box. And you'll notice this one defaults to being a pentagon, but we can give it like an arbitrary number of sides. In this case, 5 sides is actually what I want. I'm going to, let's see, it is really being fussy about how much I zoom in here. I'm going to say edit the collider. And once this is highlighted in, when I come in here, you'll see this little green handle appear. Be a little careful where you grab it by. If you want to get it into a corner and then you want to actually click on it, and then you want to drag that corner to where you want it to go. So like I'm taking these guys to the corners of the wing. I'm not going to worry about being super precise about it. If I were working on this for a more intense project, and then I'm going to take this guy down to the nose. Now this is getting finicky. If I were working on this for a more pro style project, I'd go into the collider info and I'd edit these points directly to make sure that like the nose point was exactly on the center line and things like that. I'm not going to fret about that right now. I have a reasonably good wedge shape. It hugs the shape pretty well, and it would be extremely hard for like any kind of bullet that got into this empty zone to not hit one of the other corners in the process. So I'm not too worried about hitbox fail. And you don't, the physics engines generally really like your polygons to be convex. That is to say, no place where they bend in on themselves. So if I wanted to hug that shape even closer, I'd basically need two separate polygons added onto each other in order to qualify. And it would have an impact on performance, a small one, but an impact. I doubt anyone would ever notice it on a setup like this. Computers, for the most part, have way more power than they need to. But, and then, like I said, we need another collider. In this case, I'm going to go to the main camera because what I want to do is whatever we're looking at, I want that to be the borders. I don't want to be able to fly off the screen. The first times I learned to do this, the tool was that you made boxes and you put them around the edges and stretched them out, basically, so that you couldn't go off the side without crashing into a box. There's a better tool that I'm more aware of these days, which is basically made for situations like this. So I'm going to highlight the camera. I'm going to go to add component. I'm still in 2D mode, and I'm going to find Edge Collider 2D. The Edge Collider is designed for doing things like creating colliders along, say, uneven ground surfaces in an action platformer or something like that, where the surfaces might be sloped and irregular. It lets you define an arbitrary number of line segments that all together make up a line that things can't go through. Although they can only not go through it from one side. So it won't prevent something from outside from getting in, but it will prevent things inside from getting out. So I'm going to click Edit Collider. And let's see, we have the scene view. Do I have to zoom in on the, let's see, Edge Collider. There's my, oh, that's probably why, is because I had my gizmos turned off. Precisely because the, well, let's see, if I have it turned on, no, it's still disappearing. Okay, I'm confused by why my scene view is being this flaky about visibility. But let's see, my gizmos are on. Okay, so yeah, I don't really want to edit it from out here. But again, if you come close, once your Edit Collider mode is on, you'll see these green dots appear. And if I grab one of them and I drag it up to this corner, say, and I grab the other one and I drag it over to this corner. Now, right now, in its current form, what it's going to do once I get this more or less positioned is it's going to prevent anything off the top from coming down in, not what we want. But if I point somewhere in the middle and I grab, it adds another point so I can drag the shape out. And I can bend it over here, and I can do the same thing over here to bend. Now it's just really not happy. To bend that over there, and I can move this over like to match the other corner and drag up into this corner. Again, this is a case where if I were going for more polished, I would go through and I would fix these, like all of these positions. So that instead of 2.5, 2, 3, 4, 8, 7, I just make 2.5 because that's the top edge of the camera. And so forth. I'm not going to spend a lot of time tweaking these because the issues that they create are very small. But once I've done this, I can move, and when I hit the edge, I stop. One thing I'm going to change while we're running, because I only want to demonstrate it, I don't want to keep the change. As we've talked about, if you're in player mode, you can change stuff, but as soon as you leave player mode, your changes all go away. I believe I already have this rigid body set up with the constraints set to freeze the Z rotation. If I turn it off and I go back here and I move around and I push up against the edge, it will bend over to finish as much of the motion as it can. And therefore it will get tweaked around in the process. That's technical. And I don't really want this guy able to face any direction except up, honestly. That's how these games are structured. In the main project, I'm gonna leave that constraint turned on. But it doesn't come that way. That's a thing that I did that basically says the physics engine, whatever other simulations it's doing, it's not allowed to turn this thing. Not allowed to rotate it. So now I have a scene that I can actually maneuver freely around, and I'm clipped to the edges of it. I can't escape. So the other feature that I want to start in here on is, like I said, to demonstrate how coding can do things like modify the scene in live time. You need to go for something, bathroom, something, whatever, go. Thank you. And so I have a partially written script here where, yes.
Did
I not delete that one? Is it a trigger? It should be a trigger. Was from yes, it's a trigger. I deleted a bunch of the other stuff. I apparently missed that one from a partially completed project. That's to address a part of the project that I don't get to today, which is to put, if I put enemies further up on the map's supposed to scroll down. to not do anything until they come into view, basically, so that they'll touch the trigger and then they'll wake up and start like flying their route or whatever. So it's there for a feature that we're not going to talk about today. Meant to take it off, I missed it. So I have, one of the features, it's a shooter. We shoot things. Currently, we don't. I have, my player has a collider, he has a rigid body, he has a move script. What he does not have is anything that does any kind of shooting. I do have a script here called Player Gun. It's partially complete. It has the little infrastructure bits. It doesn't have the meat of what it needs to do yet. I'm going to add this gun script to the player. I don't recommend using the scene view for that. You'll do something like add it onto the sprite inside of the player rather than the player itself. But now if we scroll down, I can see that the gun script is on the player object, and it has a couple of features. It has another input action. This one is preset to be a button rather than a 2D value. It's the fire control. It just should, we don't care, is it going left or right? We just care, are they pushing the button? And right now, it's not set to anything. So in preparation for being able to do stuff, I'm going to add a binding. I don't have the composite here, for instance, because it's not a 2D. I'm going to add a binding, and I'm just going to select it. And in this case, I'm going to say path, mouse, left button. Okay.
Add to the sprite or the player?
Add to the player. It will be more reliable that way. It might work if you add it to the sprite, but it's a better idea to add it to the player. All right. So I have that control set, and it has a slot here for a bullet. We'll come back to that in a minute. And it has this float set. But what I want to do is I want to open the script up so we can see what is there. We have our component, the gun. We have defined an input action. As with the move script, I have to be prepared to enable it. I'm also setting up that whenever they start holding the button down, that's what this dot started means. Along with anything else it is doing on that occasion, it should also run this fire function, which right now doesn't do anything. We'll have to address that. And then when this component is enabled, it turns on the input action. Ideally, it should also disable it when it's disabled, but that shouldn't affect us here. Now, in order to create new objects in your scene, you can do it the hard way. You can have code that says make a new game object, and all it will have is a transform, and then say add a renderer to it and add a script component. You can do all of that. Most of the time, you don't do that. You make an object which is a model, a template of the thing you want to make, and you say make a copy of this. And the thing that you copy could be something in the scene, but far more often it's an object which is in the project and can be reused across the scene. So for example, I have here this bit where it says small bullet. This is what we call a prefab. It is an object that was probably built in a scene, but a copy of it was migrated into the project. We can see looking at it that it has all the regular features. It has a transform, it has a render, it has a rigid body, it has a collider so that we can detect when it runs into things, and it has a bullet script, which let's see, I'm going to turn down a little bit and make it not quite so fast. The bullet script, basically when it's created, says start moving at whatever speed you're given, starts a 10-second counter that if you haven't run into anything yet, destroy yourself, and then also says destroy yourself if you do touch anything else. The 10-second counter is basically there so that if the bullet somehow gets out of the scene and like just keeps going, if you're not careful about that, what you end up with is a bunch of rogue bullets that are just bogging down the physics engine, checking to see if they've collided with anything when they're outside the space. So I make sure that if it didn't run into anything, it still cleans itself up. So I have this prefab available. I can make a copy of that. We do that with a function called instantiate. Instantiate. And we tell it what thing to copy. So I have a variable here that I set from the inspector. That's going to be, whatever it is, it has to have a rigid body 2D on it. That's what's going to happen here. Now, if I just do it like this, it's going to make a copy of it, including like where it is in the coordinate system. So it's probably going to appear at like 0, 0. And it's a little weird if I'm steering over here, but I'm still shooting out of the middle of the screen. That's bizarre. So I'm also, this function will allow me to also specify where I want it to go. I'm going to say, whatever object has this gun, create this new bullet at the same location, not location, position. Position is the word. And create it at with the same orientation, the same rotation as the other one. So if the ship is pointing up, ideally the bullet should also be pointing up. And now we are starting to get there. If I come back here, wait for it to. Yes, okay, just want to make sure. All right, so recompiled, I say go, I wait for it to reload. What even is the reloading domain? Is that the new reticulating splines? That's another joke that may not have survived SimCity 2000 when you were creating a new map or booting into a map. It would give you a progress of everything it was doing. And for a little while, it would say reticulating splines. There are splines, but they aren't really used very much in SimCity 2000. They are a thing. Reticulation is not a thing that you do to splines. So it was basically just put in as a bit of meaningless technobabble in order to see if like anybody was paying attention, maybe. I don't know. Or as an inside joke for the developers. So this is running. I can move. But if I click the left button, oh, well, I get an error message, which we can't really tell because I really want to kill whoever decided that Unity should default to a black status bar with dark red error text on it. You can just make out that there's some text there, maybe, but even on here, I can barely see it. If I go over and look at the console, it gives us a message. The variable bullet has not been assigned. You probably need to assign the variable of the player gun script in the inspector. That's actually one of the most helpful error messages I'm used to seeing. Another one that you might end up seeing is null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object. Also known as the $1 million mistake. And indeed, the problem here at the moment is that if I go to the player and I look at the gun script, my bullet is none. So I can't make a copy of it. It is nothing. So I can go back to my project. I can take my prefab and I can slot it into that spot. And I shouldn't need to change any of my code for that yet when I try this out. Only the thing is, now it's a little bit weird. When I click, mostly what happens is my ship just twitches and maybe might see something flicker in for just a moment on the side here. I saw it once. I have not seen it again. Nope, there it just was for just a moment. What's going on here? Yeah.
The bullet is smaller than the ship and it's colliding.
It's set to destroy itself when it collides with anything else. And yes, it's spawning, overlapping the ship. So the ship is budging a little bit, trying to stop colliding, and the bullet is disappearing. There's a few approaches to this to try and deal with the situation.
I think I have an issue where the bullet is spawning before the ship.
Check the sprite sheet 77 inside of your player and make sure that its X and Y are set to 0, 0. And you might also have to fix the polygon collider, although you might be able to get away with just changing its offset. Make sure you're not in play mode while you're doing any of this. Did somebody see if he's missing a particular, I thought it. I mean, the spawning is very brief because it destroys itself. If the ship is twitching when you click not see if we've got a particular, like, variable's not set or there's an error or anything like that. There are a few approaches I could do. One is I could try to rewrite the code so the bullet is a little further forward, so they're not overlapping. It's a fragile solution to try and do things this way. For one thing, if we have, say, multiple ship sizes or a buff that, like, changes things, we might suddenly end up with a collision anyway. It potentially creates a number of problems. Another approach, which is better, is to separate out layers on this. Layers basically allow you to define which categories objects belong to and set things like whether or not they collide. But it's not necessarily a good solution by itself, and it is more complicated, so I don't want to dig into it here. What I've generally found I need to do anyway is that the physics engine, and both the 2D and the 3D physics engines can do this. You can take two colliders and tell it, hey, these guys, they get a special exemption. They're just not going to collide. Don't even bother checking. Not allowed. They're special. So I go here and I say I would like the physics 2D system to ignore any collision. And then in parentheses, I put the things I want it to ignore. One is whatever rigid body I might have, whatever collider I might have. I'm going to say get component on this, implicitly on this game object, get component of type collider 2D. And that could be a box collider, it could be a sphere collider, it could be a polygon collider, doesn't care. We will look for any collider that fits that description. And fetch that, and then, because we need two things, we put in a comma. However, I need a way to talk about the bullet that I just created. I neglected this bit. I need to catch it and remember it. So I'm going to say var shot becomes, that's what I use the single equal for, is it changes or establishes a variable to mean a particular thing. So now shot is going to be a reference to the thing that was just created.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna collect this a reference to this object, and then I'm gonna do the same thing with it, but I'm gonna say specifically, does the shot have a collider component? And then it's got this little red wiggle at the end. Because it's a programming language, you basically have to put a semicolon at the end of everything. It's just like you're supposed to put a period at the end of all your sentences. Only, whereas failing to put periods at the end of sentences makes us like twitch a little and try to make sure we understand the sentence, failing to do it in computer languages means it just is like, no, I can't understand that, you have to fix it. It will not guess. We actually don't want it to guess. Once I've done that, I come back here. I'm going to move over a little bit because the dark bullets are much easier to see against the light ground than they are against the dark water. Play. So many load boxes. So I'm going to move over here, and now when I click, I do actually see the bullet survives. And you can watch the hierarchy and see it appear where it says small bullet clone. The only thing is, as soon as it hits the top edge of the screen, it hits that same wall that we put to stop the ship, and it eliminates itself. It goes away. Bye. But we have our basic feature working here. Question? Yeah. Although I'm going to be tweaking it in a moment. So the one thing that I might call an issue here is I can hammer as fast as I can hammer the button, it will go. And maybe that's okay. It depends. This is not necessarily a tech question. It's also a design question. What do we want? But for, in some cases, like you have a special weapon like a missile, it might have a restriction on how often you can fire it. Like you have to wait a second before you can fire it again. Or these games do frequently allow you to hold down the button and fire a constant stream of shots. But if we're not careful about that and we do that, what will happen is it will make a new one every frame. And frequently that will cause its own problems. The bullets will end up stacking up on top of each other, which in this case also means that they'll probably remove each other. And even if they don't, a lot of times they will end up creating sort of like a clump of bullets as they displace each other, trying not to collide, and they'll end up going off. It's a bad time. So we still want to be able to restrict the rate of fire. Now, how we go about doing this depends very much on like what version of Unity the people teaching you are using, when your tutorials are from and things like that. What I'm going to use now is a fairly modern approach. Basically, I need a variable that will keep track of whether I'm firing or not. I'm going to call a bool. For those of you who are not necessarily doing much coding yet, bool is a variable that is either true or false. It's just a yes/no question. And I'm going to call it firing. Are we currently firing? And I'm going to say we are not, at least not when we are first created. Notice that this is outside the function because it has to retain its value across multiple attempts to fire. And once I've done this, I can come back to my fire function and say that if we are currently firing, then just return from this function. That says stop this action and don't do any of the rest of the stuff here. So if we are already in the middle of firing, don't shoot. We have to wait to be done before we can try and do this again. What? I just could not clearly hear what you said. The H. A cooldown. Effectively, yeah. It's the same basic principle. Now, that also means that I need to say that if I've gotten this far and I'm going to start firing, I have to say that firing should now be true with an equals in there, a single equal. I generally try to avoid, say, firing equals true because there's two different kinds of equals in programming. I say firing gets true or firing becomes true. And then once I'm done, I need to say that firing is false so that to make it clear the way to do it again. But we run into an issue here, which is that it will do that instantly as soon as it has made the last bullet, which means it's not actually doing anything. We need to say, wait for the cooldown and then set firing back to false. And if you look at older versions of Unity, they'll frequently do things like set up coroutines and things like that. But the way the current versions of Unity are building a lot of their features, they're trying to move towards a more C# based solution, which is to create functions that can actually kind of pause in the middle. And in order to do that, I have to put this word on, I have to go to the beginning of my action definition and I have to say async. And this just says this function is capable of saying, I'm going to put a pin in this and come back to it later.
Have a wait.
Right. Then we can go in here and we can say await, awaitable dot wait 4 seconds async. And then I have my ROF variable for rate of fire. And do that. And so what this ends up saying is just, if we are already firing, do nothing. Otherwise, declare that we are firing so we can remember this fact. And then make a bullet. And then hang on and come back to this after a half a second. And then turn firing off so that future versions will go. And so when I save this, and I wait for it to finish reloading, so it'll give me the Unity window. So if I go over here so I can see what's happening, I can hammer the button, but I still only get new bullets at a specific measured rate. Doesn't matter how often I click, it's still just going to do that. I can play with this a little bit if I want to. I'm going to leave this in play mode because I don't necessarily want these changes to be permanent. I'm going to go down to my gun script. I could change the rate of fire, 3.25. And now I can fire much faster. Twice as often, in fact. Or I could make it even shorter and say 0.05. And get them pretty close together. Or I could make it very large and say 1.5. And now I basically have to, I'm Space Invaders style. I have to wait for the bullet to go out of the screen before I can shoot again. And even if I'm hammering the button here. So I have successfully basically created a firing operation that blocks until the allowed amount of time has passed. Tomorrow, I'm going to try and do a little bit of stuff in 3D, but I will probably come back to some of this just so we can, on Friday, just so we can explore, hey, what if we want to make things that we can shoot at or things that can shoot back at us? Yes.
Quick question. Instead of like fire started, what if I wanted it to be evolved?
I have what I have a version of the code that does that, not right here, where I have made a loop here that basically says, it basically just keeps going around after the wait. And if it sees that fire is not still being held down, it stops. And I have a minute or two here. In that particular case, let me make sure that it's not running because you get weird glitches sometimes when you edit scripts while Unity is in play mode. I made this slightly different just for ease of access. Instead of firing being a bool, I made it an input action. And I don't make it like a custom action. I just make it it's a reference to another existing action. Okay, I'm not using nullable, so I'll just leave that there. And one of the things you get when you get information from like a started event or something like that is you get information about what happened. So instead of setting firing to true, I am going to set firing to active.action. So that's the thing that I got here. And instead of returning because firing is true, I'm going to return fire if firing is not null. And instead of setting firing back to false, I'm going to set firing back to null. Now, at the moment, I have done something that does exactly what we did before, but a little clunkier. But having reference to that action gives me a very easy way to say, is the button still down? So I am going to say, I'm going to change a couple things here. I am going to say 4. And I'm going to put an open brace here and a close brace after this whole process. I'm going to continue doing the for loop as long as this component is enabled and firing dot is pressed. So if either the gun component gets switched off or the object becomes inactive, or if they let go of the action that started this process, whatever it was, then we bail out. We stop the loop. And in between loops, then is generally when I say move on to the next loop. I could leave it blank and do this down here, but these days I usually put it in the advanced condition here. And basically say that the way to move from one pass of the loop to the next is to wait. And once I've done that, because yeah, this was something I was practicing doing a day, like yesterday, actually. I'm ready for today. If I come back here, had just about enough time to. This is good. This means I have the best established, most featureful recording to put up for people. We didn't get through all of this during that. I'm going to play. And again, just so I can see what's going on. And now if I just hold the button and notice I'm not clicking, it's producing a steady stream of bullets, which stops after I let go. Although you cannot cheat the rate of fire. If you let go, it will still wait for the recoil time to finish before, even if you press the button again. If I change the rate of fire to something much shorter, like say 0.15, then when I hold it, and this is actually much more like the typical behavior for a top-down scrolling shooter, is that allows you to just kind of spray bullets all over while you're moving. I will also upload an updated version of the package that has like the finished version of everything that we've done, so people can review that code as well. So, but at this point, we've hit 12 o'clock. We're all set here. Save anything you're working on, log out of your computers, and get some lunch.
I got a question.
Sure.
I want your perspective on this game.
Okay. Let me stop my recording.